Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon and welcome to this new edition of the Rafael del Pino Foundation's keynote lecture program with Professor Bryan Caplan. Welcome, Professor Caplan, to the Foundation. It's an honor to have you with us once again, and we would like to thank you for joining us once again, for sharing your thoughts. He was here earlier on June 25th, 2019. Likewise, on behalf of the Foundation's Board of Trustees, I would like to thank you all for joining us, those who are here today with us in person and those who are following us live through FRP TV's online platform on our channel, which you can find on our website as well as on our social media, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. It really is a pleasure to have you with us and to listen to your thoughts on the foundations of freedom, democracy, and governance, which the professor will delve into in his work entitled The Myth of the Rational Voter, Why Democracies Choose Bad Policies. I was going to say they choose bad politicians, but, well, it was published in 2007 and is now published in Spanish for the first time. We would like to congratulate the editors of the Spanish version of this work, part of the political essay collection promoted by Value School, Francisco García Parames and María Ángeles León, the de Mariana Institute, Manuel Llamas, and Deusto, María Campos. We would like again to thank them for their collaboration and to congratulate them for his new publication and always having an open door for authors who contribute to the debate on freedom. Professor Caplan is a leading economist and author recognized and acknowledged for his contributions in the fields of public economics, public choice, and behavioral economics. He got his BA in economics from the University of California, Berkeley, and his PhD from Princeton. Since 1997, he has been a professor in the Department of Economics at George Mason. And beyond his academic work, Professor Caplan is a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center and an associate professor at the Cato Institute. He has published extensively in specialized journals and his blog, EconLog, and is the author of several influential books, including titles such as Selfish Reasons to Have More Children or Against Education, as well as, again, the aforementioned The Myth of the Rational Voter, published by Princeton University Press and chosen as Best Political Book of the Year by the New York Times. His lecture today, part of the Foundation's Liberal Voices, the professor will tackle the central themes of his work, where he challenges the notion that voters are rational and are well-informed. He will argue that, in fact, they are systematically biased and make suboptimal democratic choices, thereby favoring the adoption of economic policies that are detrimental to their interests. We are certain that your presentation, Professor Caplan, will provide us with insightful and provocative thoughts on the challenges facing modern democracies when it comes to formulating public policy. Professor Caplan, we would like to sincerely thank you for joining us today to share your time and knowledge with all of our guests. Your work inspires us, drives us to question our own perceptions in the search for deeper understanding of democratic processes and dynamics in a time when the winds of authoritarianism are blowing around the world. Professor Caplan, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
It is thrilling to be here in Madrid. I am so excited to be here. I am so excited to see The Myth of the Rational Voter has finally been translated into Spanish. There are many languages that got there first, but finally, the Spanish language work is there. This is my second time speaking here. Once again, I'm very grateful for your kind hospitality and, of course, the incredible support in translating the book. I know that it is not easy to translate academic books into Spanish. There is an idea everyone that would read it is already speaking perfect English. I don't think that's so. So hopefully this will allow a lot more people to hear about these ideas, which I think are especially relevant to the Spanish-speaking world. Everything from understanding the Spanish Civil War to what's going on in Venezuela or Argentina today. I think these ideas are relevant to all these cases. Now, this is, of course, the cover of the English language version. And now I'm going to take you through a journey through the main ideas of the book. Let's see. So a few of you have the simultaneous translation. Okay, but all right. I'm going to try to slow down. So I know that I talk too fast when I get excited, but all right. Just to start, it is actually very well known in social science that most voters know very little about politics and very little about economics. Anyone who looks at the data knows this. Anyone who grades undergraduate exams in political science knows this. If you actually know any of the facts, you cannot deny that the level of knowledge is very low. But there is a view saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference that voters don't know what's going on, that they don't know who's responsible for what policies, that they don't know how the government works, and they don't know what the effects of different policies are. This is a very strange idea. Imagine if you were waiting to get surgery and the doctor says, all right, I'm going to go and open up your head and take out your heart. It's like, that's the doctor. I'm very worried if the doctor is confused about the location of my heart. I think that's going to be a problem. And yes, you would reasonably be very afraid if someone who had the power to make choices seemed to lack basic understanding of the facts. So how could it not matter that voters know so little about politics, economics, and other subjects where democracy asks them to have an opinion? And here is the standard answer. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, how do you decide? You flip a coin. You flip a coin. That's the way that social scientists think about ignorance. It's random error. Sometimes you're too high, sometimes you're too low, but that actually is okay because democracy is not the rule of one voter. It's the rule of millions of voters. And if you flip millions of coins, the result is actually highly predictable. Right now in Monte Carlo, right, there's casinos playing games of chance. Is anyone worried that a casino will go out of business tonight? Right, probably not. It's like, can't someone get really lucky and win a lot of money? Yes, but they're not going to get that lucky because there's other people who are getting unlucky, and every night it almost always balances out. All right, so if voters' errors really are random, then there's something in statistics called the law of large numbers, which says that in percentage terms, the errors will cancel out. And therefore, even though most voters know next to nothing, the well-informed voters actually are in control. Like, how would that work? Well, suppose that 90% of voters know zero. They know nothing. So you see people standing in line to vote, and you ask them, what are you doing? And they say, I'm just going to flip a coin. 9 out of 10 people, like, I don't even know what's going on. I don't know who's even in charge. I don't even know what country this is, right? I'm just going to flip a coin when I get there to decide how to vote. 9 out of 10 people give you that answer. You would understandably be worried about this political system. But imagine 1 person out of 10 knows everything. They know what the prime minister ate for breakfast. They know every detail of every policy. They've read in economic theory. They've read in foreign policy. They know an enormous amount. Right? So that's 1 person in 10. You might say, well, what good will this do if 90% of people know nothing, 1 in 10 knows everything, but the 1 person in 10 will be outvoted. So how does that help? And the answer is, if the 90% who don't know anything vote randomly, then 45 of those percentage points will vote for one side, 45% will vote for the other side, and that means that it is the well-informed that actually will decide the election. The well-informed will know what's going on, and if one side is actually better than the other, the well-informed will vote for the side that is better, and then the better side will win with 55% of the vote. What is this saying? It's saying that the winner in democracy will be whoever has the support of a majority of the well-informed, which is just what would happen if everybody was well-informed. All right, this is the story. This is not my story. This is the story that inspired me to write a book saying the story was incorrect. Now, in English, we have a saying, which is, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Do you have that saying in Espanol? Yes, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Like on late night American television, there's a commercial saying, you too can start your own alpaca farm. These are just get 2 alpacas, put them in your backyard, and before you know it, you will have hundreds of alpacas. You'll be making enormous amounts of money. Anyone can do it, no prior experience. Just send us $1,000 and we will send you 2 alpacas. Now, I don't know much about alpaca farming, but I have never sent them the money. And yeah, it is because if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. The key assumption of this idea, right? And yes, this idea has a special name. It is called the miracle of aggregation, or el milagro de agregación. El milagro de agregación. What is el milagro? The milagro is that 90% of voters can know nothing, 10% can know everything, and yet the electorate acts as if everyone knows everything. That is the supposed milagro. All right, so the key assumption of the miracle is that people who don't know what they're doing flip a coin, that their errors are random, as opposed to systematic. What would be a systematic error? Systematic error would be in archery where you always lean left. Someone who's shooting the target, they think they're going for the center, but the arrows are all on the left side. Random would be you're equally likely to be on one side or the other. Systematic is there's a pattern, there's a predictable error. All right. Now, when I started writing this book, the question in my mind was, a lot of smart people believe that errors are random. I'm skeptical, but I'm going to have to find the research and argue with it. And when I actually started reading what had been written on it, I discovered there's just very little evidence that anyone has even tried to present to show that voter errors are actually random. When I asked economists, often economists really give one of the worst arguments that a person can give, which is, well, if there was systematic error, that would be irrational. It's like, well, how do we know that's irrational? Because that's the definition of irrationality. So that doesn't prove anything. You're just using words to trick people if that's all you're doing. Right now, when I talk to political scientists about it, I often got this reaction, like, wait, you're an economist? Right? Well, we believe that errors are random because economists told us they were. Oh, so not much actual evidence. Now, just because there are no good arguments for something doesn't mean that it's not actually true. So part of what I did writing the book is to try to find out, well, what arguments could you make? What evidence could there be in favor of this view? So there are several ways that you can test for random error. In the questions, I can talk about other ways. But the one that I emphasize most in The Myth of the Rational Voter is comparison of laymen and experts. So now I realize this is an imperfect test. It's an imperfect test. Sometimes experts are biased. So for example, when my car has a problem, the auto mechanic in America almost always tells me it will cost $2,000 to fix. Whatever it is, it's $2,000. All right. However, my dad is a lifelong automobile enthusiast. He has a massive collection of antique cars. So when I hear from my mechanic that I have a problem that will cost $2,000 to fix, I call it my dad and I repeat the words that the mechanic told me. And then I ask my dad what I should do. Right? And normally my dad will say it's a waste of money, just drive it until it breaks. All right. Thanks, Dad. That's very useful advice. Now, what if I were to tell my dad, that's what you think, Dad, but why should I trust you? It's like, well, because I'm your dad and I love you and I've spent 60 years working on cars, so I know a lot more than you and you should defer to me. And that's a good argument. And that's why on anything relating to cars, I trust my dad, because he knows a lot about it and he also has no motive to lie. So what I do in the main empirical part of The Myth of the Rational Voter is to try to test for systematic differences between laymen, people who don't know much about a subject, and experts. controlling for other factors. I want to be open-minded and say, well, maybe there are good reasons to think that experts are not reliable. All right, so in the United States, we have DEI experts, right? So diversity, equity, inclusion experts. And I will say, yes, I don't trust them because I think that they have a giant body of dogma that they are trying to present, and I don't think that they actually have thought very hard about the subject. All right, but that's a case where I have a specific complaint. Now, the key assumption, though, is if there's a disagreement between people who've studied a subject for many years and people who've studied it barely at all, then there's at least a presumption in favor of experts. There's a presumption in favor of experts. Again, does not mean that experts are always right. And in the book, I try to say, well, what are some reasons why we doubt experts? Let's try to statistically adjust for those reasons. Now, the result of doing this is that it is easy to find large systematic disagreements on almost all important questions. And since I am an economist, but also because economics is so important for policy in modern societies, I do focus on disagreements between economists and the general public. All right, so several data sets get examined in the book, but there's one that was especially helpful. It was called the Survey of Americans and Economists on the Economy. It was one that was perfectly designed for my mission, but I had nothing to do with the study, which is actually better. Because if I ran the study and I say, well, I ran a study and it turns out that economists know more than other people, it's like, well, you did the study, so of course. Like, no, this was other people did it. They shared their data with me. And in this data set, you see that this milagro de agregación fails very badly. What are the main patterns? And if you want to learn about everything that I found, you can read the book. But the main patterns that I find in the data are the following. First, anti-market bias. Compared to economists, the general public greatly underestimates the social benefits of the market mechanism. Non-economists tend to assume that if someone is getting rich, someone else is getting poor. Now, aren't there plenty of economists who complain about markets? What about Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman and Thomas Piketty and everyone else? They're all there. But if you listen to them, especially on their good days, they have a very different complaint from normal people. Normal people say someone is making money solving problems, that's bad. Even left-wing economists usually say something like this: there's no way to make money solving this problem, and that's bad. Very different stories. Now, the complaint that you might make to the left-wing economists is, well, the fact that you can't think of a way to make money solving this problem doesn't mean no one can, but it's still a much better intellectual approach to say markets will solve the problems where you can make money solving them, and the issue is some problems it's very hard to make money from solving them. The general way of thinking about this, it's like, well, how could it be that that regular people benefit from businesses making money? It's like, well, how do businesses make money? Normally, you make money by making consumers happy. If you are running Amazon, Amazon is an incredible business, right? They are incredibly successful. How are they successful? By giving people incredible convenience, incredible variety, and low prices. Right? And not just for 1 year before they destroy all the competition and then they take over the market and forever there's a monopoly. We're still waiting for Amazon to go into phase 2 of the plan. So far, we've had 25 years of Amazon being great, and it's totally reasonable to expect another 25 great years. Another example of anti-market bias. In the United States, in most cities, it is normal that 10 times every week, the roads are completely clogged with traffic. Every economist in the country knows how to solve this problem. How do you solve it? Stop charging zero to drive. Charge a price and make the price change with the level of traffic. High traffic means high prices. It is very easy to do. And actually, a 5-minute walk from my house, you can walk over the freeway and you can see the economics right there. And I've taken my kids and their friends there. It's like, kids, come here. I want to show you some economics. You can stand on a bridge over the freeway, and you can actually say, you see, there are 6 free lanes, 6 gratis lanes, no price. You see how they're clogged? There are 4 pay lanes. Those lanes are going at, what would it be, 130 kilometers per hour. What's the difference? Why is this, how is this possible? Yes, because of course, in the free lanes, people go there and they don't need to worry about the effect they're having on the driving others. In the paid lanes, people have an incentive to think about whether or not they want to do it. Right? And yet, of course, the normal reaction is toll's evil, just a way of ripping us off. Not just a way of ripping you off, a way of making the roads work. Another big pattern that I see in the data is what I call anti-foreign bias. People are especially pessimistic about economic interaction with foreigners. In the United States, this is now at probably about a 100-year high. There is this idea, these horrible foreigners are selling us cheap products, ruining our country, isn't this awful? And the standard view from economists for centuries has been not awful. Many arguments here, probably the simplest one of all comes from Frederick Bastiat, when he said, look, imagine that countries just gave us everything we wanted for free. Wouldn't that be great? Should we complain if other countries just give us everything that we want from them for free? No. Well, then why would you complain if it's cheap? Free would be even better, but the complaint is always, it's too cheap. It should be more expensive. Right? So just a very strange idea that we want our customers to be charged high prices from other countries. Probably the simplest argument for understanding the benefits of free trade, there is a story called the Iowa car crop. The Iowa car crop. So we don't really make cars in Iowa. But it's a story saying, imagine there's a scientist, and he says, I have discovered a new incredible technology for turning corn into cars. And everyone laughs at him, like, ha ha, that's not possible. But he builds a factory at an old abandoned warehouse by the docks. Corn goes in, cars come out. Oh my God, he has figured out a magical new technology for turning corn into cars. People are amazed. Like, this revolutionizes all of science. Until a journalist sneaks in with a camera and discovers there's no new technology for turning corn into cars. All he has in there are boats. And he puts corn on boats and sails them to Japan and comes back with cars. The point, and then he says, so corn into cars, a complete fraud. The point of this story, it's an allegory, really. The point of the story is trade is a technology for turning corn into cars. What difference does it make what happens inside of the factory? From Americans' point of view, what difference does it make that a country called Japan even exists? All that is happening here is that trade is a way of turning one product into another product, and the reason that you use this method rather than another is it's the cheapest way of getting the job done. The only real difference is there's also another country where people are benefiting at the same time as you are. So in that sense, it's even better than having this technology. So protectionism is very much in the news, although much more important expression of anti-foreign bias is global hostility to immigration. If you think about it economically, what is immigration? It's just international trade and labor. It's international trade and labor, right? Which is actually the most important good on earth. About 70% of all income on earth goes to labor. If you have free trade in everything except labor, you really have very restricted trade. Right? And many people say, well, why can't they just produce goods and then export them to us? Because many goods are many things are services where you cannot actually sell the good unless you are next to your customer. You can't take care of my baby from Spain, right? You can't mow my lawn from Mexico. You can't make restaurant meals for me from Cuba. You have to actually live next to your customers. The amazing fact about immigration, right? And this is a fact that you really cannot deny if you are looking at the facts. If you let one immigrant in from a poor country to rich country, their income multiplies by a factor of 10 or 15 almost instantly. This is not ideology, it's not philosophy, it's just observe. a Haitian worker comes from Haiti to the U.S., gets a job, how much money does he earn in the United States compared to Haiti? This is an amazing fact, and I always say, if there's anyone that isn't amazed by it, you should be amazed. Because what other piece of paper can you stamp that will multiply someone's earnings 10 times? Right? If there was a piece of paper that would multiply your income 10 times, you would want that piece of paper, right? What a great piece of paper that can multiply your income 10 times. Economically, how is this possible? It's got to be that productivity is higher in rich countries than in poor countries for the same worker. And really the only question is this scalable? If we can do it for one person or 10 or 100 or 1,000, can we do it for 1 million, 10 million, 100 million? I have a whole other book where I talk about this, but after I visited United Arab Emirates, I had to say, wow, maybe I didn't even need to write the book. There's a country proving that what I'm saying is true. Because Emirates is 88% foreign-born, and by the power of immigration, they have gone from a backwards hunter-gatherer, well, agricultural society anyway, to one of the most amazing countries on the planet. And without those immigrants, they couldn't possibly have done it. They needed those workers to make the miracle happen. Other patterns in the data: make work bias. Non-economists tend to judge economic performance by jobs instead of by output, right? And yet, it is very easy to create new jobs. Milton Friedman supposedly was once on a farm where workers were digging with shovels, and he said, why don't you use tractors? And they said, oh, that would destroy jobs. And then Friedman's answer, well, in that case, why don't you dig with spoons? Why use shovels? All right. The key fact here, of course, is, does technology sometimes destroy jobs? It does. But the secret of mass consumption is mass production. The way countries get rich is not by giving people jobs, it's by production. And while for one worker, they may not care, do I have a lot of money because I'm producing, or is it just something that I'm being given? But a country cannot work that way. A country cannot just be a bunch of people who all get a job where they don't have to do anything, because then what would there be to buy? And the last pattern that I talk about is what I call pessimistic bias. Non-economists tend to see a world in decline that is bad now and going to get even worse, whereas economists are much more likely to see progress. Now, there is the question, could it be that the economists are the biased ones and normal people are correct? This is a very common view among especially politicians. Like, those eggheads will tell you that, it's like, but actually we all know the opposite. Like, well, all right, I guess that's possible, but why is it that you distrust the experts in this way? All right, well, there are two main stories about why experts should not be trusted. One just says self-serving bias. Look, the experts are rich, they've got job security, they've got a great position in society, they think whatever is good for them is good for the world. All right, there's another common story. Economists are just a bunch of right-wing neoliberals. So you can't believe a word that they say. They start out as dogmatic followers of Adam Smith, they go to graduate school, and they come out and say, oh, wow, isn't Adam Smith great? That is another story that you might have. But these stories actually are testable. Anytime that you give a specific story about why someone can't be trusted, we can examine it. Just by analogy, right? Imagine that you're on trial for murder and all the evidence is against you. And then someone says, how do you explain all the evidence? And you say, like, I am being framed. People are trying to pretend that I'm guilty. They're faking the evidence. And then you say, okay, well, who's framing you? I don't know. How are they framing you? I don't know. Why are they framing you? I don't know. If those are your answers, you have to be convicted, right? Because if those answers were acceptable, then everyone could get off for murder. Right? Instead, you need to say something like, who is framing me? And you say, Jose Gonzalez is framing me. How? He works in the forensics lab. Why? He's always hated me since I stole his girlfriend in high school. It's like, all right, that's a good story, right? And that is a story we can investigate, and we can check the specific story, the parts of the story, and see whether they're true. Similarly, if you say that economists can't be trusted because they're rich, this has a prediction. It says that economists and rich non-economists will agree. If you say it's because economists have job security, let's compare economists with job security to other people with job security. So this is possible in the data, and it's almost totally wrong. Rich non-economists with lots of job security generally think like normal people. That ideological bias story, that is even more wrong. Why? Because it is not true that the typical economist is a right-wing neoliberal. Typical economist is actually, at the time of this data, was a moderate Democrat. A moderate Democrat who would still say free trade has large social benefits, downsizing has big benefits, supply and demand controls the price of gasoline. They would still say things like this, which again, if you have a person with left-wing values who still says that markets are working well, that is one of the best tests of this is a person who ideologically doesn't want to say that, but they're saying it anyway, and that is especially convincing. All right, so when you go and actually run the test, you see that if anything, belief gaps between laymen and experts get even larger when you adjust for ideological bias. Now, a question that is one that academics like, but it's not as dumb as it seems. Like, all right, bias is true in fact, but how is it possible in theory? How is it possible? Right? And say, well, who even cares? Well, okay, I care. I am an academic. I do care about questions like this. And I think you can learn a lot by thinking this way. Like you see a helium balloon floating and you say, like, how does gravity allow for that? There's an answer, actually. I don't fully understand the answer, something about densities of different gases. But anyway, it might seem to someone who doesn't understand the physics that it's not possible for a helium balloon to float and gravity being true. Actually, it is. All right, so bias is true in fact, but how is it possible in theory? There's a long-standing story in economics that's called rational ignorance. So what? So ignorancia racional? ¿Es correcto? Excelente. Okay. All right. So the story has a number of problems. So one is technical, and that is that normally the way that economists model ignorance, the error must be random by definition. So that's one problem. But more substantive problems. Rational ignorance does not explain why uninformed people are so dogmatic. You would think that if you never studied a subject, you would be agnostic about it. So take my dad. My dad is a very smart guy. He has a PhD in electrical engineering. He has never opened an economics textbook, and he has very strong views, and his views are terrible. Let's see. Sus opiniones son terribles. ¿Es correcto? All right. So yes, my father has long believed that we can save the American economy if we just put a Berlin Wall at the Mexican border and a naval blockade of Asia. Those will solve our problems. Everything can go back to the 1950s when everything was great in America. All right. The fact that his son is an economics professor doesn't make any difference to him. He doesn't care at all. Right? So I respect him as an automotive expert, but he does not respect me as an economic expert. But to the level that he's not even curious. He doesn't say, well, what is the argument? It's just like, well, I don't see why that would be. It's very angry about it. My dad is not alone. It is very normal, as you may know from social media, for people who know next to nothing to be very angry and certain of their views. That is not what you would expect if someone was reasonable. A reasonable person who has barely studied a subject just says, gee, I really don't know. Who's to say? Maybe I'll learn more one day, but until then, I don't really have a strong view. But in politics, you don't need knowledge to be certain. And most people don't bother to get it. And yeah, finally, it also does not explain the emotionalism. Like, why is my dad so angry? Why is he so angry about international trade? What difference does it even make to him? Right? And yet, he seems to lose sleep over it. Right? And my dad is not alone. He's not, at least he doesn't go and argue politics with strangers on social media. That's a higher level of anger. It's a higher level of just really need to calm down. So again, the case of the tariff. If the rational ignorant story of tariffs were true and you talked about it, normal reaction would be like, there's a tariff on Mexican oranges? I didn't know about that. Or like, what's a tariff? Or like, what's Mexico? Right? These would be what you'd expect from someone that really just wasn't bothering to learn something that didn't personally matter to them. But instead, the more normal reaction is like, the Mexican tariff is absolutely essential. It's the only thing that can save our country. Probably it's too late anyway, but it's the last thing we can do, our last hope. All right. So then this does bring me to question, again, partly inspired by my own father, which is why would people be very rational sometimes and very irrational other times? On something like how to repair a car, my dad's word is gospel. He knows what he's talking about. He knows it, he can do it, he wins prizes. Totally reasonable person there. But on other areas, so anything involving economics and politics, he's just crazy. And I'll say this, even when I agree with him, he's crazy, because he gets the right answer for the wrong reason. Right? So it's like still doesn't count. Doesn't count. It's like getting a math problem and you just write and 2 pi is the answer. It's like, it is. How do you know that? I don't know. I just guessed. It was 2 pi. All right, so what I proposed in the myth of rational voter is we can really think of irrationality as a special good. Like, why would anyone want to be irrational? Well, here's the problem. If you're a rational person, you might have to change your mind. A rational person is willing to look at evidence. They're willing to listen to arguments. And people don't like changing their minds, especially for things that are central to their identity. As you may have heard, in the modern world, politics is religion. Many people, they don't care about traditional religion, but politics is the religion. It's what has taken the place of religion in their lives. So if you have ever seen a supply and demand diagram, this is one where we have the quantity for rationality, where we have the price. And all I'm saying here is when the price of irrationality falls, people are going to buy more of it. They will relax their intellectual standards. Now, here is the crucial connection to what I've been saying. Some errors are very costly and others aren't. Right? If you believe you can fly by jumping off a building, you will not believe that for very long. Right? You'll be dead. Right? But on the other hand, if you have ridiculous views about economics or politics or history, for you as an individual, what difference does it make? It's like, well, if we all thought the wrong thing, it could lead to a bad policy. I didn't say that. I said, what difference does it make for you? Right? Oh, for me, yeah, I'm not able to change policy. Which means that it's very much like a lot of other problems economists talk about, where, for example, when you are driving a polluting car, the effect on you is very small, but there are many other people who suffer from the harm that you do to the air. So you are basically saying, well, it's more convenient for me. A million other people cough a few extra times per day. But from a social point of view, this is bad. And I say politics is very much like this. In fact, I say irrationality, it's political pollution. It's where you go and you take the bad ideas in your head and you push them out into the world. You feel better, but if enough other people agree with you, then it's very bad. Now, the crucial test, many people said, well, how can we know this is true? Say, look, here is the hardest evidence, most convincing. It's just betting. Betting. How do you say betting in Espanol? Say it loudly, because apostar? Apostar. All right. In many areas of life, but again, especially in politics, people will often make very confident predictions about the future. One reaction is to get angry and argue. But what I like to do instead is say, all right, it seems unlikely to me. How about we bet? Why don't we bet? And since you said that you are certain, how about I get 10-to-1 odds? I have a very good track record in betting. So out of 23 public bets that I have that have actually been resolved, I've won all 23 bets. But I have hundreds of bets that didn't happen. Why? Because someone said something ridiculous, I offered to bet them, and they said, no, I don't want to bet. What happened? That happened. The price of irrationality went from zero, which it normally is, up to $100. Or often it's $100 plus public humiliation. Because if I bet a famous person, it's not really about the money. It's mostly about I showed that a person who claimed to have deep knowledge about the world actually just was wrong. Right. So this is a general technique. It is a way where you can, in an instant, raise the price of irrational thinking. And I say that if you do just pay attention to how people respond, someone can be very sincere, very angry, very confident, and then you offer to bet, and their whole psychology really does change. It's like, well, oh, you want to bet on this? Well, I mean, what do we even mean by this? Well, you're the one who was talking. What did you mean by it? Let's see whether we can come to an understanding. I mean, one common result when there's a bet is that it turns out you don't really disagree, you're just using words in different ways. Like once on Twitter, someone said, immigration is going to cause a civil war in Europe. And I said, okay, so a civil war is what, like 10,000 combat fatalities? And he's like, no, there's already a civil war happening because an immigrant murdered 2 people in France last week. It's like, oh, so you count 2 murders in a whole country in a month as being civil war. All right, well, that's a strange definition of civil war, but then we don't disagree. All right. But that is one step. But then another step is also, how confident are you? If you say that you know for sure, you should be willing to bet your house against my penny. That is what a certainty should really give you. 1 + 1 = 2. I'll bet my house on that. Right? People do not like doing that. Right? Sometimes say, well, why should I give you good odds? And the answer is to entice me to bet you so you can take my money. Right? If you really actually knew the answer to what would happen in a horse race, and you saw, oh, well, the odds aren't very good, you should still bet in the horse race because it's free money, if you actually know the result. But what people generally realize when they actually think about betting is, oh yes, I don't actually know. I'm just making things up. All right, now, why is this inefficient? Why, or from a more general point of view, why is it bad for society if people vote based upon their illusions instead of calmly trying to figure out the facts? And I say the answer is this. The private cost of irrationality, the cost the individual voter pays for being totally wrong, is near zero. But the social cost can be enormous. Hitler was elected on the slogan, "National Socialism means peace." It was actually a slogan he used. I say it was crazy to ever believe him if you would listen to his other statements, but he did say that. Right now, here is the interesting thing. What happened to the Germans that voted for Hitler? Well, they got war and it was horrible. What happened to the Germans who voted against Hitler? The same thing that happened to the Germans who voted for Hitler, right? Because it's a collective decision. It doesn't matter what side you are on. That means that the actual cost to you of voting for terrible policies is in fact microscopic. It's only the probability that you change the outcome, which is truly tiny. So yes, as I said, voter rationality is political pollution, and the majority can easily be better off if it does not get the policies the majority supports. Does this mean that every dictatorship is an improvement? No, of course not. It just means that maybe it is a bad idea for the people to get what they want. If the military had just not released Chavez when there was the coup against him, would that have been better for Venezuela? I think you'd have to be crazy to deny it. Right? Or once I actually was talking to an Egyptian graduate student, this is around 2000, and he said, look, but this is like the argument that Mubarak makes for not having democracy in Egypt. He says that if there's an election, the Muslim Brotherhood will win and destroy the country. And I said, well, isn't that true? And the graduate student was very uncomfortable. But he said, well, yes. And I said, okay, so it's not Mubarak's argument, it's your argument. Maybe it's wrong, but guess what? We actually got to see what happened, and the negative forecast was correct. All right, now for remedies. Let's see, how much time do I have? Am I short on time? 5 minutes, okay, great. 10 minutes. So one common complaint about my book is I just don't offer remedies. That's not true, but I am shorter on remedies than on diagnosis. Why? A lot of it is that people love democracy so much. For many people, democracy is their political religion, complete with the most ridiculous dogma of all, which is that any problem of democracy can be cured with más democracia. The cure for any problem of democracy is even more democracy. It's like, why would you think that? What evidence is there? What evidence would change your mind? Like, no evidence. Whatever happens, we just needed to have even more democracy. All right. So a lot of what I wanted to do is just to convince people that these dogmas are wrong, that just because most people believe in something does not make it true or wise. And this is a hard task because there's so many mental blocks that people have to considering maybe what most people want is just a bad idea. Probably the most recent version of this is to blame all problems in democracy on misinformation. It's like, look, democracy is perfect, but there's just misinformation. And what is misinformation? It's people talking, some of which is wrong. It's like, well, what do you propose? It's like, well, it's a system where you can only say things that are true. It's like, that's democracy? System where you only say things that are true? But in any case, even if you did think this, there's still the question of, well, how does misinformation work? If people are just making up ridiculous lies, why do people believe it? Do you believe the misinformation? No, of course I don't. So what's the difference between you and the people who believe it? Well, yeah, they're kind of irrational. So I say, so the fundamental problem really has to be irrationality. If it was just that people are being tricked by unreliable sources, it's like, well, why don't you just tell them they're unreliable? Or why do they even need you to tell them? Why don't they just look at it and say, well, this looks like it's just totally biased and made up. They're saying things where they contradict specific known facts, so I don't trust these people anymore. So yes, I think the real complaint with misinformation is that people are irrational, but it hurts people so much to say that because that's a much more fundamental problem. The problem is misinformation. If we just get rid of the misinformation, the system will work again. All right, that itself is almost impossible to imagine because, so isn't a lot of what people are deciding in election what views they even consider true? How can you even have an argument if the truth is known in advance? But even laying that aside, still the fundamental problem is if someone believes misinformation, they probably did not exercise proper caution. There's actually a line from The Simpsons. People still watch The Simpsons? Yes, all right. And the lie is, Homer tells Marge, look, Marge, it takes two to lie, one to lie and one to listen. And yeah, okay, the real problem is it takes two people to lie, one to lie and one to believe a habitual liar. Or one just to believe a total stranger that you have no reason to trust. And yes, if you do that, then yes, you do bear a lot of the blame. Anyway, so this is why I did focus so much on diagnosis, just to convince people there is a problem, which is very hard. Now, towards the end of the book, I do talk about ways to improve things, and there is a list. So one that I think is very important is just politicize less of life. In democracies, normally there's a list of policies that we don't vote on. In the United States, we have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and also freedom to have as many children as you want. We don't vote on these things, right? These are depoliticized decisions, and part of what I say is it would be better to have a lot more depoliticized decisions, right? The current U.S. system is actually the president can impose any tariff he wants without any supervision from anyone. It's bizarre. I didn't even know this until 2017. I always thought at least you would have an act of Congress, but no, the president has sole power. Wouldn't it be much better if we had the opposite system where the Constitution said you have 0% tariffs and that is required and you can't do anything else? I think that would be one example of depoliticizing a decision. Or to take another example, in housing policy in the United States, sometimes there's what is called by right construction. This is an area where as long as you satisfy the regular rules, the government cannot stop you from building a house. It's like you are entitled to do it, and you don't need to go to the city council and beg for permission. You just are automatically allowed to do it. Right? So in my book on housing regulation, I said we need a lot more by right construction. Right? So that would be another example. Something else, you could have supermajority rules where you say, look, it's not enough to have 51% voting for a tariff. How about 2/3? How about 80%? If you had that rule, then of course we would have lower tariffs. Another one is to have expert supervision. In the United States, we have the Supreme Court, which can rule a policy unconstitutional. And in the book, I say, well, maybe the Council of Economic Advisors should be able to rule a policy uneconomical. And then it's not allowed, right? There's one idea that people have talked about the most is, how about having a test of voter knowledge to vote? Or maybe a test where you get extra votes. Everyone can get one, but if you do well in the test, you can get 100 votes. That's another idea. It's one that I like because even if the tests were biased, still, you need to know, a person who understands a subject can recognize a biased test and knows what answers they are supposed to give. I often had biased professors in a class. I would still get an A. How? Tell the professor what he wants to hear, and then you will get an A. And if you understand the subject, you will be able to tell the professor what he wants to hear. Now, the most modest reform of all is stop encouraging ignorant people to vote. all propaganda saying it doesn't matter how you vote but vote is crazy. This is like saying it doesn't matter if you went to medical school, just do surgery. It's like, the responsible lesson is don't vote unless you have carefully weighed the arguments of all sides. That would be a much more reasonable thing. That doesn't require any change of law. It's just changing the nudge. Instead of saying, everyone vote, doesn't matter what you know, it's saying, look, be cautious. Think about what you're doing. It would be a service to the public, if you don't know what you're doing, to abstain. All right, and I will leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. Now do I need to do anything with this?
Yeah, the channel. The channel is here.
Turn it on?
It's already prepared.
Where is it on?
Yeah, this one.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And
Can you hear me, sir? Professor, can you hear me? This is your interpreter. Professor, can you hear me? This is your interpreter. Can you hear me, Professor? Professor, this is your interpreter. Can you hear me? Professor, this is your interpreter. Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Professor.
En español.
Thank you very much. I wanted to say thank you very much for joining us again. We have a number of questions. I'm going to try to synthesize them. The questions have to do with the contents of the book, and then there are another series of questions which are a little bit more ambitious, if you will, that take as a reference the Austrian school, and then there are other questions which have to do with our concerns, our questions in the world about what is happening in the United States. We're going to leave that for the end, and we're going to focus on the contents of the book. Let me begin then by addressing the contents of the book. The concept then of irrationality, rational irrationality. Am I coming through, Professor? This is your interpreter. Am I coming through? Am I coming through, Professor? Professor, am I coming through? I'm your interpreter. Am I coming through, Professor? Okay, thank you. If you can just ask the first question then has to do with the concept of irrationality, rational irrationality. You explained that this irrationality happens when persons decide to defend erroneous beliefs because the cost of being wrong, the price of being wrong, is not very much at all. So Mariana Torquemada asks, how can we differentiate between an irrational belief and a legitimate opinion which is based on personal or cultural values? And furthermore, are we analyzing and are we not running the risk of delegitimating alternative political positions, alternative to the consensus, the dominant consensus? Thank you, sir.
Sure. Let's see. So just to start, of course, if a view is just wrong, then you should delegitimize it. Is there the risk that if you call anyone irrational, someone would say, no, you are irrational? It's like, yes, of course, anyone can point at anyone and call them irrational. What I try to do in the book is to think about what are neutral objective standards whereby you could say that someone is falling short of rationality or not. If someone were just to deny it, then it's just a problem that we have in all conversations. Someone can always just say no, 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 no to everything you say, and all right, I guess we can't continue the conversation. The question of like, how would you know if it was rational rationality? That comes back, I think, the best standard to betting, right? So if there was a person who really was willing to bet their house against a penny, say, okay, that person's actually irrational, right? Someone willing to die for their belief, like that person really believes it on the deepest level. Fortunately, almost no one believes it that intensely. You will have religions where they promise paradise for anyone who dies in holy war, and yet the number of people that want to sign up to die is usually like 1 out of 1 million. It's a very small number of people that actually believe it that deeply, whether to give their life or to go and bet even when the odds are extremely unfavorable. Now, what about, could it just reflect different cultural values or something like that? So in the book, I'm really focused on beliefs about the world. So it's got to be something where you can say that it is or is not the case. So those are the ones that are easiest to understand. What would it mean to be irrational? If someone says, look, there's a unicorn standing before us and there's not, it's like it's not a cultural difference about whether there's a unicorn. There is a fact about whether there is or is not one. There is a deeper philosophical question about, could you call a moral view rational or irrational? I don't talk about it in this book. It's just too deep and hard of a question. I'm actually the view that really any view can be assessed as for rationality and truth, but you don't need to agree with that to accept the idea that for factual questions there is a right and wrong answer. And a person who says, well, my culture doesn't accept that gravity exists, is like, well, then your culture is wrong.
Hay varias preguntas que tienen que ver con el...
And then the role of experts. In general, the functioning of democracy. I have to say that it's actually a part of all of the questions that are being posed. So let me now go to the question which is posed by Rafael Montero, the role of experts and their bias, which you have expounded on, which you described. Now, what is being broached here is experts are right, perhaps, in the economic realm, but the discrepancies between public opinion and the experts show us that it is the voters who are irrational. Now, because experts may have biases or be subject to an influence, and Rafael Montero says, because there are vested interests, how can we guarantee that the recommendations of those experts always be the best for society in general? And then there's two piggyback questions, which we'll give you later.
So how can you guarantee that experts will always be right? You can't. That's an incredibly high standard. Like, how can you guarantee that anything will ever always be right? You can't. Even in the history of mathematics, I've asked mathematicians, are there any theorems that people thought were true for a long time and then later turned out to be wrong? And there are a few examples. Even mathematicians can be wrong for centuries. It's like, oh, yeah, that's tough. But fortunately, it doesn't happen very often. So I'd say the real question is not, are experts always right? Which is, of course, not. The question is, if there is a disagreement between laymen and experts, who should you bet on? That is a much better standard. Who is more likely to be right, and how much confidence should you place on that? There are a number of reasons to doubt experts, like I said. In the modern world, I think one of the most reasonable bases for doubting experts is, like, aren't 100% of the people in that field left-wing? It's like, They'll say, for a field like sociology in the United States, there really is something like a Democrat-Republican ratio of 40-1, right? And among people in public health, among people in climate policy, extraordinarily biased ratios. Now, you might think, well, maybe they became Democrats because they learned a lot of climate science. All right, we can go and investigate and find out, well, when did you first adopt your political philosophy? And guess what? Like, almost everyone gets their political philosophy between the ages of like 15 and 20, long before they know any actual facts, long before they're experts in anything. So it's like, all right, so it just seems like this is very likely to have a strong bias. And then we can do what I did in the book, which is, all right, let's go and try to statistically control for that. Let's see, so, all right, if almost all climate scientists are convinced that that it's a serious problem, all right, what about politically independent scientists who just aren't Democrats? What do they think? If they think exactly the same thing, I'd say, well, it's pretty convincing. Even people who have a political philosophy that is against the normal one still say, on this matter, the mainstream is right. On the other hand, you may discover that is not so. So yes, during COVID, what we saw is that on the one hand, there was a strong consensus for lockdowns. On the other hand, left-wing people overwhelmingly dominate the field of public health. There were some dissenting voices. Generally, people were not left-wing. That's where we realized, all right, so this is not something that seems to be primarily about knowing a lot about contagion. It seems to be a lot more about having a political philosophy, which then you pretend you have special expertise in. So this is the kind of thing that I would suggest doing. It's one where you can do it statistically, but even just to say, all right, so what did the dissidents in your field say? Like, who are they? Every field has them, so it's an important question. And again, the same thing with vested interests. Say, well, if it's really true that it's because of vested interests that people have these views, then we should be able to go and find experts that don't have any association with those vested interests and see whether they think the same thing. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. So again, I don't have a dogmatic endorsement of expertise. What I do have is that presumption, where it's like if someone has studied a subject for a long time, and you say you haven't, and you say the expert is wrong and I'm right, well, why? Right? And if you say, look, they have a financial interest in telling me that my car needs a $2,000 repair, all right, that's a pretty good reason. But if my dad, who knows a lot about it, says I need the repair, I think it would be very odd for me to say, what do you know, Dad? It's like, I know 60 years worth of repairing cars, son. And it's like, well, why should I trust you? Because I'm your dad and I love you. It's like, all right, good arguments. Not apodictically certain arguments, which is a standard that no reasonable person can expect in real life. You've got to go with the best bet, not with absolute proof.
Hay una pregunta.
And there's a question from Pedro Perez. And this question addresses the following issue. What is the difference between you and Jason Brand from Georgetown's, who recommends that voting should be in the hands of those who know?
Epistocracia?
Epistocratismo.
Absolutely.
Yes. So Jason Brennan is a good friend of mine. We see very eye to eye. His proposal of epistocracy is very similar to one of those reforms that I mentioned, where I said you would have a test of voter knowledge, and either you get extra votes if you score well, or you can't vote unless you score well. The main thing that I would say, and I think Jason would say this too, is it suffers from a terrible catch-22. Let's see, this morning I was asking someone, do you know this phrase, catch-22 in Espanol? Well, it comes from a novel called Catch-22, and the idea of the novel is there's an American pilot in World War II who feels like he's going crazy. So he goes to the commanding officer and says, you shouldn't let me fly anymore, I'm going crazy. And the officer says, no one who is crazy would say that, so you have to keep flying. He says, fine, I'm not going crazy. Well, great, go fly. So it's one where whatever you say, you get the same answer. The problem with proposing epistocracy is we can only get to it with a democratic vote. And you're not going to be, and precisely because people don't agree that they don't know what they're talking about, they would vote against it.
Yes, and there's many questions that have to do with this issue specifically, and I'm trying to group them all together. I apologize if I ramble a little bit. And it has to do... No, we'll do this. Okay. This is about... Thank you for that. No, this is about reforms to actually reduce democratic irrationality. Taras Kovalov broached the possibility of an exam before voting. Issues such as this. What is your opinion regarding weighted voting systems? What do you think about a more important role of technocratic institutions to improve the systems? What would you say?
Yeah, so the idea of having a test, I think, is very reasonable. And the strongest objection, like I said, is just the test would be biased. I'd say, even if that were true, it's not that big of a deal, because well-informed people can detect a bias and then tell the test what the test graders want to hear, and we still will then get an electorate that knows more. So I think that is, in general, a reasonable idea. Of course, like I said, there's a catch-22. In order to get that, you would have to convince a majority of people that they currently don't know what they're talking about, and they do not accept that, and they're unlikely to ever accept that. It goes against their orgulloso, right? So weighted voting systems in general, there's a reasonable idea. In terms of more technocratic management, this is one where I'd say I'm more skeptical than I wrote The Myth of the Rational Voter. See, when I wrote The Myth of the Rational Voter, my view was, look, so economists do lean left-wing, but even left-wing economists generally have very reasonable views about how markets work compared to the general population. Typical economist, when this survey was done, was a moderate Democrat. Since then, there has been a big shift left in economics. When I wrote the book, or excuse me, when I had the data, the Democratic-Republican ratio in economics is about 3-2. Now it is more like 4 or 5-1. And among economists under the age of 40, it's more like 15-1. So unless there's some incredible change, economics in one generation is going to be a normal social science with overwhelming left-wing dominance and with a strong tendency towards extreme left-wing views. So that's a case where I would say I had more confidence in the economics profession when I wrote the book than I do now. Now I am genuinely worried that the profession is basically just going to become another crummy area of the humanities and social sciences. Let's see. And then also, so the other one that made me very concerned about technocracy was the response to COVID. I have written a few pieces just doing basic cost-benefit analysis lockdowns, and you can walk through my reasoning. You don't need to be an academic to understand the reasoning. The math is pretty simple. But I say that there is very strong evidence that the costs of COVID prevention were at least 10 times as high as the benefits. Right? All of this, if it saves one life stuff, right, that was pushed so strongly by public health specialists and experts, all based upon a terrible approach to policy. And I can't say that many economists were much better. There was a very strong support among economists for taking extremely strong approaches. It was an elite view, and this was one where I think that elites were just not doing the math. I think it's one where if they had done the math, they would have realized how crazy it was. I actually had an argument with my sons who are double majors in economics and math, and the argument was, if I could get 90 minutes to speak in front of the math department at Vanderbilt University, could I have turned them into lockdown opponents? And I said, I think I could flip like a third of them in 90 minutes. And my son, no way. And then they actually tried explaining it, some of the math professors, explaining my arguments, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My wife would still make me go and follow the rules, but yeah, you're probably right. So, all right, well, it's pretty good anyway. So more skeptical about experts. Again, a lot of it, honestly, just because of the extreme ideological bias of academia, which is how we generally certify expertise.
Hay una pregunta un
And there's a question which is a little bit controversial, but we love controversy. Alejandro Duran has a question which is a little bit delicate, sensitive, talking about buying votes. If votes are bought with money or with government benefits, the bought voter is irrational, would you say?
That would be a case where I'd say at least no reason to think so. The voter is saying, look, my vote actually makes almost no difference for my own life. Someone's giving me money for it, so good deal. I know there are some economists who actually are optimistic and think that vote buying would work better. It's one where, look, you have to remember the very high negative externalities of voting. It could be that people with better views would buy votes and improve policy, but it could also be that people with worse views would buy votes and make policy even worse. I don't think there's really any strong evidence that vote buying would improve things. Although, yes, I don't have the horror that people have of vote buying. It's like, this is a horrible violation. It's like graffitiing a church. It's like, all right, well, let's calm down. It might be that it would be better to go and buy votes. I don't know. Yeah, but definitely not a sensitive question.
Okay.
And a final question, which has to do with reforms to reduce democratic irrationality. There's a number of questions, and they have to do with alternative systems. So, for instance, we have Pablo Parguina, who wants to know your opinion regarding a system which would elect legislators by means of a voluntary lottery. Do you think that would solve a problem, the one of rational ignorance? And there are other questions. In Spain, for instance, we especially focus on the election of the leaders in our judiciary system. The judiciary system. So there's a debate. that election, should it continue to take place in Parliament, or a system which is already being defended by some Spanish experts, a system whereby those positions would be chosen by means of a lottery? Would that not be a better alternative, a better choice?
Right. So the first idea of democracy by lot, this has history in ancient Greece. I have no optimism this would be an improvement, because even if there's 100 people that are voting, still the individual effect of one voter is very small. So I don't think that the incentives are actually that much better. I mean, it really is like raising the price of soap from 1 penny per bar to 2 pennies per bar. I don't think that's going to change the amount of soap people use very much, and I don't think you're going to get much more thought from people. And also, of course, once someone wins by lot, there is a lot of reason to try to influence that person, both regular political pressure as well as just moral pressure on them. We will hate you if you don't go and vote for the policies that we favor. So I'm not optimistic about that. So appointing judges by lottery, I guess I would say a lot of it depends on who is actually included in the lottery. If it were from a sample that's already very biased, and then I'd say, yes, well, this sort of removes one of the last checks upon getting any alternative views. On the other hand, if it were a more representative sample, then maybe. I find that very generally, social scientists and philosophers like the idea of a new procedure to fix things. Right? So one of the crazier ideas, there's economist Glenn Weil. He's a system where he wants people to be able to save their votes between elections and then be able to spend multiple votes in an election, but first you take the square root. I'm not kidding. He calls this radical democracy because the radical is the square root. So anyway, and my response to this and almost all their voting reforms is, does this reform imply that we'll be able to build skyscrapers in San Francisco? If no, then I'm not interested. The focus on getting the right procedure is generally just focusing on the wrong thing. The focus should be on finding policies that are terrible and figuring out a way to fix those policies. So policies where it is almost impossible to build anything. The real thing is the voting rule that gets you the better outcome is the better rule. We shouldn't be thinking about it being a procedure and whatever the procedure delivers is then known to be good. That's sort of the problem with democracy itself, is thinking as long as people vote for it, it's good. It's that doesn't make it good. If it produces prosperity, if it gives people long life, if it gives you peace, these are external measures of success, and these are the measures we should be thinking about.
Pasando al ámbito de la...
Thank you. And now, in the relationship that exists between the market and democracy, if we accept that market mechanisms are better to find the most efficient solutions, but there's a number of questions that focus on whether citizens are irrational upon voting. Why would they not be just as irrational when participating in market activities? So scientifically, would that not lead to the market actually generating suboptimal equilibriums or balances? I've tried to summarize 3 questions. I hope they came through.
So let's go back to what I was talking about betting. Why would you think that people would be more rational if they are betting their reputation or betting a lot of money versus just getting to talk and say whatever comes into their heads? Well, of course they're going to be more reasonable when they are betting money. The money is what gets people to think, oh, now there's actually bad consequences for me of being wrong. This is the big difference between markets and democracy. If you go to the store and you buy a bunch of products that you don't like, you have wasted your money. If you spend time to make better decisions, you benefit from making those better decisions. So this is one of the main ways that markets are much better than politics, is because the individual actor is spending and really betting their own money on whether or not what they're doing is a good idea. On the other hand, in democracy, the whole point of what I'm saying is that a person can vote for the opposite of what would be good, and what happens to them? The same thing that would have happened to them if they voted the other way. That is the fundamental difference. In markets, you are the one that is spending your own resources, which gives you very strong incentives to think. Now, does everyone in markets think well? Of course not. You can give a child some money and see what they do with it. And some kids are very clever and crafty. And other kids just go and spend all their money on the first thing that they see. Still much better to go and say, look, to the child, this is your money, you can spend it how you want, than to go and say, just tell me what you want, I'll buy everything you want. Democracy is much more like that, where politicians just promise the world to people, and then people just say, oh, I want everything. Much better to go and have this discipline, which doesn't work perfectly, but still, if there was any significant number of truly deeply irrational people so irrational that even when their own money was on the line, they would waste it, I would be much richer than I am. Because like I said, I love betting people that are wrong. And the problem is I just can't find anyone that is so irrational that they will bet their house against my penny. No matter how crazy they are, they won't do it. So it's like they're crazy, but they're not that crazy. They're not so crazy as to actually put a lot of money behind their very poorly considered views.
Una última cuestión sobre...
And the final question now, this is also regarding the Austrian school, and it has to do with Anna Devoto's. And she actually asked this of Professor Amuk when he came with a different approach. And the question has to do with the degree of public intervention. How much should there be? The Austrian school posits the need to ensure that there be minimum state involvement. But the question specifically is the average voter being irrational and taking wrong decisions regarding collective goods. Could it not be upheld that this actually bolsters the need to have regulations and state planning in some critical areas, such as healthcare, education, and infrastructures?
No. Let's just take that example of healthcare. Right. You can't put a price on your health, right? Well, if it's your own money, everybody does. That is why private medicine is better. Because if you have to go and decide, do I want to live one more year in horrible pain and suffering, and at the cost of selling my house, or do I want to say, yeah, it's not worth it, I'm going to just die 1 year earlier, it's not very good anyway. When it's your own money, you have a reason to weigh this. Some people might actually go and spend everything they have and deprive their children of inheritance for a very small gain. But when it's your own money, most people will not. In fact, getting people to spend even $100 of their own money on healthcare is hard. For plastic surgery, they'll do it. For other things, not so often. On the other hand, what is the role of government in healthcare? It's like, everybody should get the best healthcare in the world for free. All right, that's ridiculous. It sounds really good, it wins elections, but it's absurd. Like, so you're going to spend $1 million to extend someone's life on dialysis for 1 day? Like, why? Like, why is that a good use of money? Like, if it's your money, you have a reason to say there's trade-offs and health is not the only good. But when you put that power in the hands of government, they do the thing where they actually say, we'll spend any amount of money. Of course, even government cannot really spend every possible amount. But this is the main reason why spending on healthcare is so high per person and why the measured gain in terms of improvements in life expectancy and health are so low. Costa Rica has the same life expectancy as the United States. They spend about 1/10 as much per person on healthcare as the United States. How can this be? Well, the actual science of health says that lifestyle is much more important for health than medicine, and yet it is much more politically palatable to say, let's lock everyone up in their homes for a year for COVID, than to say overweight people should probably lose some weight now to improve their health, but I recommend it, but it's up to you. I say, the main problem with government is precisely that they don't want to make hard trade-offs. They want to be Santa Claus. You have Santa Claus here, right?
Santa Claus.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And they want to just avoid questions like, well, how much actual gain do we get per euro that we're spending? Whereas when people are spending their own money, not everybody does ask those questions, but a lot of people do. And of course, there's a lot of people that you think, well, they're not going to care about money. It's like, well, how much money? So I'd say these are the areas where the benefits of the market over government was high. So you had health, you had infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Again, infrastructure is one of the most mismanaged industries. You can just see every country that is not charging electronic tolls to get rid of congestion is grossly mismanaging the resource. There is only one right way to do it with modern technology, and the price should be changing based upon traffic conditions. It is so easy to do it now, and yet it is very unpopular because of the public's economic illiteracy, and they just refuse to accept there are enormous benefits, like you can actually drive if you raise the price when a lot of people want to use the road. Same thing with building trains. The national pride of Spain requires we have this train. It's like, how much money is the train going to cost? What is the actual dollar value of the time that you're saving with it? To give you credit, Spain is much better at building trains than, say, California. In California, they turn refusing to do cost-benefit analysis into a full science. No one is better at ignoring basic facts and numbers than the Californians are, which I am from California, so also part of why I left. And then there was one other industry.
Education.
Education.
Infrastructure and
education. So I have a whole book on this called The Case Against Education. I say there is overwhelming evidence that we are wasting an enormous amount of money on education. What's the evidence? Most of what people learn in school has nothing to do with any job they will ever do. Everyone who has actually gone through school, if you're honest, you know this. Just think about all the coursework you had to do. What does it have to do with any job you're likely to have other than teaching that very subject to another generation of children? There is this idea in economics, we're building human capital. We're training people for the jobs of a high-tech future. What is the connection between making people learn Spanish in America? Learn Spanish. By the way, my Spanish is at its all-time maximum right now. I had 3 years in high school, I learned almost nothing. But mis abuelos hablan bien español como castellanos, pero yo no. But I have watched a lot of movies and television with Spanish subtitles while they are really getting, they're perfectos, excelentes, como castellanos, like I said. To get a good job in America, you've got to do 3 years of not learning a foreign language. Many other ridiculous requirements like this, where people just waste years and years of their life. And why? So look, the problem is that a lot of the reason why education pays is not because you're learning useful stuff. It's because you need the stamp on your forehead. Las estampas. Necesitamos las estampas. Right? What's the problem with that? Well, for an individual, it doesn't really matter why education pays. But for society, it matters enormously. If in school people are really learning how to do jobs in the modern economy, education is a way to enrich individuals and society. If the main thing is happening is that you are getting stamps on your forehead, you cannot enrich a society by having a lot of stamps. What happens instead is what we call credential inflation, where the more degrees people have, the more degrees you need to get a job. There is very strong evidence that this is a major problem in all of the major economies. Education has risen enormously, but the actual skill of jobs has only moved up a little bit. What's going on? What's going on is because degrees are so common, you now need additional degrees to get the same jobs that your parents and grandparents got with less. In the United States, it is normal for Uber drivers to have college degrees, normal for waiters at nice restaurants to have college degrees. Why did they need to go to school for this? Well, it's just the problem of if other people have degrees, then you need degrees too in order to compete. So what government does, by heavily subsidizing education, they do get a lot more of it. But if my story is right, that is not leading to a large rise in human capital. It's leading to a giant waste of human life, keeping people in school for many extra years, far beyond what would actually be needed to learn their jobs. The slogan of my book is, we think about education as job training, it is really more of a passport to the real training which happens on the job. Also, since I'm here in Spain, this credential inflation is a major factor in another horrible problem, which is low birth rates, because most people do not want to have any children until they are all done with their education. The more years of education, the longer people wait to have kids, and basic human biology, if you wait too long, especially if you're a woman, you will not be able to have kids. So I say one of the best solutions to the problem of low birth rates is for government to defund education so that we will leave school at much younger ages. This will not have bad economic effects because people are barely learning anything useful in school anyway. And instead, people start adult life at an earlier age, which includes becoming parents.
Well, unfortunately, we cannot take up any more of your time, so I'm going to summarize all of the questions into one, and I'm going to thank you very much for closing the session. So let's see. You'll come through with flying colors. I'm going to ask you to gaze into your crystal ball now. It has to do with survival of democracy. Francisco Rey, Francisco Calaria, and a number of other persons have made a number of comments. In fact, democracy seems to be backtracking. The economist indicators say that the number of true democracies is on the wane. This is the context. I'm summarizing all these questions because we see that the liberal order after the Second World War is crumbling down. And this generates uncertainty. A number of questions then that have to do with what is happening in the U.S. from your point of view. We're talking, the U.S. and Europe, right? And I do apologize. I'm not going to go into other issues that were being broached. What's happening in the States then? And another question, which is the following. Would it be that we're in the middle of conservative nationalism or technological liberalism? And where do you think that we are positioned? I'm talking about the U.S. and, of course, other questions which have to do with the tariffs. And the tariffs are a bad result of the democratic process and irrational voters. So all of these questions, which I have tried to summarize, but basically trying to understand is where are we now in terms of the survival of democracy? And as to Europe, Europe is ensconced in regulatory dystopy. It is the bastion of freedom and democracy and human rights. Now, in the kind of disorderly times that we have been living ever since the beginning of this century, would you say, Professor, that liberal democracy, as we have understood it, is going to survive? Will it survive?
Of course, it depends upon the time horizon. We said we'll survive for 1,000,000 years. And I'm like, gee, I'm really confused about what the world will be like in 1,000,000 years. But if you're talking about will it survive in the lifetimes of children that are here now, I think that's extremely likely. People generally greatly overreact to news. It's a general principle. People see a story on the news and they are much more likely to say, oh my God, this is terrible, than to say, oh, like 1,000 terrible things happen every year. It's actually probably not a big deal. Whenever people make dramatic predictions about, especially based upon what's happened in the last year, my reaction is always say, yeah, probably everything is just going to continue about the same as before. In English, we have an expression saying we will muddle through. Not sure what a good translation of to muddle. But it basically means, look, things are not going to be very good, but they're not going to be disastrous either. We'll get by. So that is my general prediction for the democratic world. In terms of the Economist ratings in democracy, it's worth pointing out that a lot of their ratings of countries not being good democracies are based just upon disagreeing with the outcomes of democracy. So Trump gets elected, and it's like, well, that's like a real democracy wouldn't elect a guy like that. And it's like why not? It's sort of like you're baking into democracy that it makes good decisions. And I would say, look, democracy, it's just a procedure. And so to go and say, for example, Singapore is a country that usually gets ranked as not a democracy. So I've written a paper on Singapore. It is a democracy. It is International observers say the elections are fair and free. It's a democracy where one party has won every election for the last 65 years. It's also a country where that one party has done an extremely good job. And also it is a city-state. It's very common for one party to rule a city for decades without interruption. So why does Singapore get these bad ratings? Because they don't like Singapore's libel law. Things like that. Because they don't like the way that Singapore canes people for vandalism. It's like, why can't vandalism and why can't caning for vandalism be democratic? It's like, oh, that's not real democracy. It's like, what if 51% of people voted to cane everyone who does vandalism? Then why isn't it democracy? So I think a lot of these ratings combine a reasonable procedural definition of democracy with the personal preferences of the people making the index, so you should regard those with skepticism. The idea of the last 25 years have been an especially troubled time is very odd to me. Like, well, what was a good 25-year period? Like, so was the period from 1914 to 1989, was that good? It's like, well, some good things happened, but also some of the worst bloodbaths in human history also happened during that time. So I am old enough to remember the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc. I think many of you are old enough to remember that too. So just in my lifetime that collapsed, and I'll just say, look, to have gotten to see that, I'm just grateful for the whole rest of my life. And I don't see anything that is nearly as bad as having the actual Soviet Union back. When people say, oh, Putin's trying to reestablish the Soviet Union, my main reaction is, yeah, good luck. Good luck. If he were able to get back 5 or 10% of what they had, that would be pretty impressive. It's not going to be anything like as bad as it was. And part of appreciating your life is just to realize and appreciate the things that you take for granted. Many days I just say, wow, I'm so glad the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. That's fantastic. I'm just happy today to have no Soviet Union in the world. Happy that Mao Zedong is dead. It's so great that he's dead. And you say, well, geez, he's not anything like Mao, at least. Much less bad than that. Overall, I would say that I expect that we're going to continue to get a lot of good economic progress, a lot of good technological progress. Politics, I figure, is probably going to stay about the same with a bunch of bad things happening. But remember, a bunch of bad things have been happening for as long as we've been writing the history of politics. The fact that one country invades another, it's bad. It doesn't mean that the system is collapsing. People like these hyperbolic words like collapse, just destroyed. It's like, all right, again, this is one where I'd say, how about we make a bet? Let's define what does it mean for democracy to collapse, right? And then it may turn out we don't even really disagree.
Pues la verdad es que ha sido un verdadero.
Well, it has been definitely a great privilege to have Professor Caplan with us today. That was a very inspirational keynote address, and this debate has definitely been fascinating. I have to say that you've opened many different lines of thought. We're going to be thinking about our democratic system, and we're going to be thinking also about how to be more rational voters. So all we can do now is say once again, thank you very much, sir. And yes, congratulations for this publication in Spanish. Thank you to the different parties that have made it possible to have the book in Spanish. Value School, Juan de Mariana.
About having such wonderful friends in Spain.
No, thank you.
All of you, it's just being able to come here is such a privilege. This is one of the things I appreciate so much. When I was in high school, I didn't know a single person in another country. And now, by the power of the internet, I have friends all over the world. Everywhere I go, there's people that I can meet and talk to, and again, I am just so grateful for this and so grateful for all of you and so grateful to the Foundation for helping with the translation of the book and for this wonderful party, wonderful hospitality. La hospitalidad de España es excelente. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you.